The Westminster Standards. This video covers material related to the Westminster Confession of Faith, Chapter 23, of the Civil Magistrate. God is the sovereign ruler over the entire universe. At the same time, He has established other authorities underneath His authority for His own glory and for the public good. Not only in the church, but also in the civil sphere, that is, the state. As Christians, we are to treat those in authority over us in a manner worthy of the gospel. This means we honor those in authority, and we submit to their God-given authority, even when they behave dishonorably, or when they are ungodly and irreligious, or even when they are of a different religious persuasion. Think about David's attitude toward Saul, or Daniel's attitude toward his foreign rulers while he was in exile. We also obey those in authority when they command us to do something, as long as their commands do not contradict God's commands. And we are to pray for those in authority. The Westminster Standards connect this giving of honor to authorities to the fifth commandment: honor your father and your mother. Here's the logic behind this. God is the ultimate authority. Parents have derived authority from God over their children. And in a similar way, God, as the ultimate authority, has given various officials, governors, managers, leaders, etc., authority over others as well. So we honor God by honoring them. As Americans, we tend to be very interested in the interplay between church and state. So let's take a few moments to talk about the idea of what is often called the separation of church and state. First off, the Confession sees the church and the state as two different spheres, but both being under God's authority. But how do they relate to each other? This is where an interesting development in the wording of the Confession comes up. There are some differences in the 1646 Confession and the Confession adopted by the American Presbyterians in 1788. The 1646 Confession saw the state as protector and promoter of the true religion, while the 1788 Confession sees the state as protector and promoter of religious liberty. The 1646 Confession has clearer institutional cooperation of church and state, while the 1788 Confession has clearer institutional separation of church and state. In the 1646 Confession, the state may suppress religious error, but in the 1788 Confession, the state doesn't adjudicate religious truth. Established Christianity is assumed in the 1646 Confession, but in the 1788 Confession, at least some level of religious pluralism is accommodated. Now, two questions arise concerning these differences. First, are these changes to the Confession simply applications of biblical truth to a different political context? Or are they changes that are more theologically substantial? And if the changes are more theologically substantial, which of the two versions is more faithful to the Scriptures? The debate about these questions continues, yet the PCA has adopted the 1788 changes to this chapter. And with that in mind, we need to understand how the American version of the Confession puts greater emphasis on the distinction between the two spheres of the state and the church. The state should not interfere with religious doctrines or practices. This interference would be a confusion of the spheres of authority. Some examples of this confusion between the spheres of state and church: think about Saul and Uzziah when they wrongly performed priestly duties, or the Holy Roman Empire, where the church basically ran the entire empire and engaged in capital punishment and war. Or the tendency in America to conflate American ideals with Christianity, or even confuse the American people with God's people as if America is the new Israel. In some cases, confusion between the authority of the church and the state could violate Christian liberty of conscience. For example, if Congress passed a law that everyone must be a member of a particular denomination, that would violate liberty of conscience and the PCA's confessional view of the church and state. In all of this, we should remember the gospel of the kingdom is not primarily a political message. It's not really about political revolution or reconstruction. Jesus' kingdom is above earthly political and national kingdoms. While Christians are not bound to partake in political occupations, they may do so if they sense they are being called to engage. According to the 1788 Confession, there are two ways in which the church and state may still cooperate. First, in extraordinary cases, the church may humbly petition the state. And second, if the state requests the opinion of the church on a matter, the church, of course, may give its answer. The state has a responsibility to protect its own people, even the various religious groups within it. And this protection is grounded in God's purposes for the state, God's glory, and the public good. Because human beings are made in the image of God, the state has an obligation to protect people. Think about the sixth commandment here. When God states a negative command like, do not murder, the positive aspect of that command is most likely implied, that is, protect life. Thus God, in the sixth commandment, commands us not only to not murder, but also to protect the lives of others. We need to cover two more questions that arise from this chapter. First, about capital punishment, the death penalty. The confession states that God gives the state the authority to punish those who do evil. See Romans 13, 1 through 4. What about waging war? Again, the confession states that God gives the state the authority to wage war for just and necessary reasons. This stems from the state's obligation to protect its citizens. You may have questions on this chapter, so make sure you let me know what those are so we can talk more about them.